time efficiently, we can start recording the session. Thank you very much, Atakan. Well, hello again, everybody. Good afternoon, and it's a great pleasure for us to have here two young and very promising scholars from Bilkent University. Ayşenur Dal from Bilkent University Department of Communication, and Efe Tokdemir from IR department, again from Bilkent University. They recently received the Sakıp Sabancı International Research Award with this paper that they have published. They have collected data, and on COVID-19, this is, I think, this is a great contribution to the literature with a lot of interesting empirical investigation into social psychological dynamics in the fight against COVID. And today, I want to say good afternoon to everybody. We have students, we have colleagues. So it's always very exciting for us to meet you. Before we get started, I want to briefly introduce our guest speakers today, Ayşenur Dal and Efe Tokdemir. Ayşenur, as I told you earlier, she's from the Department of Communication and Design at Bilkent University. She received her PhD from Ohio State University. And Efe Tokdemir is an assistant professor of international relations at the same university, and his PhD is from Binghamton University, and they both received their BAs from Boğaziçi University. And they will be, again, as I told you earlier, they will be talking us about their very recent research, and we are looking forward to having them. And I think Efe and Ayşenur, if I can give you the floor roughly about 35 to 40 minutes, this will give us like plenty of time for Q&A at the end. Again, thank you very much. I don't want to take too much time of yours. I'm very curious to listen to your research. Welcome again, and the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. So should I?
Thank you.
I guess you need to stop. Okay. Let me share the screen. Okay, is it okay? All right, cool. Hi, everyone. We are so happy to be here and would like to thank for the kind introduction. So as Ebru Canan mentioned, this is a joint work with Efe Tokdemir, and we recently received the Sakıp Sabancı International Research Award with our work titled Social Psychological Dynamics in the Fight Against COVID-19 in Societies with Underlying Conditions. So I will be first talking about the theoretical, the front end of our study. Efe Hocam will continue with the methodology and the results. So let's begin with the motivations that we had when we first started this work. So we all know by now that COVID-19 pandemic is a global phenomenon. The dictionary definition of pandemic shows us that it needs to have this global aspect, this worldwide feature. But thinking of that analogy that we often heard, especially in the beginning of the pandemic, that we're all in the same boat, that we're all in this together, the question remains, how the pandemic is experienced by individuals, is it really the same across differences? And this was our main point of motivation. And also starting from the beginning of this pandemic, we have been exposed to this discussion about how at the individual level, how underlying medical conditions are key to understanding how severe, how risky this disease is for individuals. We all know that if you have an underlying health condition such as a respiratory disease, high blood pressure, or like cancer, those individuals are at higher risk of infection and being exposed to more severe symptoms, despite their individual efforts. So we have this on the one hand, and we want to explore on the other hand, what about societies with underlying conditions? So going into the societal level, how about how society's underlying conditions and how it interferes with the public health efforts that are put forward by institutions. And this was our starting point. We focus on the Turkish case. We have previously made this presentation to a much smaller audience, and after some time passed, I needed to put the quotation marks before and after the word here. We know that vaccines are here. It may be a little tricky at the moment, but at least the idea of a vaccine is now salient to all of us. We conducted this study before the procedures, before which vaccine would be implemented in Turkey. Like all these details were not announced officially yet. But now looking at when we conducted this study, the difference is that vaccines are here. But the thing is, existing social political cleavages were among us then, they are with us now, and they will be with us in the foreseeable future as far as we know. And if we need to summarize our study, the main argument that we make with this study in light of this information, we can say that we argue that existing social political cleavages influence individuals' trust in institutions that are responsible for coping with public health crises through a motivated reasoning mechanism. So we are interested in studying the existing social political cleavages. We want to see how they influence individuals' trust in institutions, which we think is the key factor in understanding how, to what extent individuals are motivated to cooperate with the existing public health efforts. In this case, the vaccination. So whether the mechanism that we propose influence individuals' vaccine intentions. And we take motivated reasoning as our theoretical mechanism, as I will explain in a minute. So when we talk about vaccine intentions, we need to remember what vaccine hesitancy refers to as a key concept in understanding people's intentions, because this is a concept that ranges from active demand for vaccines to complete refusal of the idea of a vaccine. So it includes both ends of the spectrum. And we know that based on previous research, this is by no means a new phenomenon. Before COVID-19, there have been a lot of studies in this, and we know that it's caused by both individual and contextual differences. And in the literature, there's this 3 C's model that suggests complacency, convenience, confidence are the key components of vaccine hesitancy. So what are these components? First, complacency is about whether individuals think that the risks are relatively low and the vaccine is not the solution for the disease at hand. Convenience is about whether vaccine-related services, and this could be information or this could be the vaccination itself, are affordable for citizens or convenient within their reach. They know how to access it. They know when they can access it, so on and so forth. So this is convenience. And finally, confidence, which we focus on in this paper, is about the reliability and competence of institutions, policymakers, and professionals, as well as whether individuals think that the vaccines of interest are safe and effective to fight the disease. Okay, so these are the main components of vaccine hesitancy. And in our study of vaccine intentions, we focus specifically on the 3rd C of this model, which is confidence. And when we talk about the vaccines, we need to definitely think about the intermediary institutions that make the vaccination possible. After all, at the organization stage, at the implementation, distribution, in all these stages, there needs to be some form of intermediary. If not, you still need a health professional to give you the vaccine. And when the institutions are involved, whether individuals are confident, whether individuals confident in or trust these institutions become very important. After all, I mean, we are facing a huge public health crisis, and we need to take that leap of faith if we are to leave ourselves to the procedures that are designed by institutions, that are decided by institutions that are directly influencing us. And taking this leap of faith involves the extent to which people are confident that the relevant institutions will firstly operate in their best interests. And secondly, they will also operate in accordance with what citizens think these institutions should be doing as the institutions they are. So normative expectations. And why is this important? Especially for social policies that are targets at mitigating health crises, immediate health risks. You need this leap of faith for public cooperation. And when you have mass cooperation, when you have public cooperation, it in a way legitimizes these agencies, these institutions' actions, their decisions in the eyes of others, in the eyes of those who haven't cooperated yet, or who are still unsure about whether to cooperate or not cooperate. And in the best scenario, it ensures a widespread adoption of any risk behavior, any risk preventive behavior that these policies try to endorse. And in studying this, we rely on two theoretical approaches, two main theories. The first one is recreancy theory. This theory is basically about understanding what goes into individuals' trust in institutions. And according to recreancy theory, trust in institutions is about how we perceive the competency of these institutions and whether they hold on to their fiduciary responsibility. The competency is about, as I previously talked about, whether we think that they are competent enough, whether they can really carry out the actions that they are supposed to be taking. They are competent in performing their assigned tasks. And fiduciary responsibility is about, fiduciary responsibility refers to building that relationship that's based on trust. That's based on that confidence that these institutions will be holding on to their responsibilities of serving their citizens' best interest. And this involves impartiality. This involves they're not going to discriminate one group of people. They're not going to prioritize certain segments of the society without any basis, without any meaningful rationale for fighting the disease. So this is the theoretical framework that we use for understanding institutional trust. So what about what's happening at the individual level? After all, we are studying vaccine intentions, which is happening at the individual level. And we're interested in whether, how society's underlying conditions, which can be, issues that polarize the public, political cleavages, social cleavages, certain crises that are particular to the the topic of interest. We're interested in how individuals are influenced by these underlying conditions in their decision making when it comes to vaccination, whether their intentions are influenced by who they are in a society with underlying conditions. So for that matter, we use the approach called motivated reasoning, which basically stands for individuals' tendency to reach conclusions consistent with their existing attitudes and beliefs. According to this approach, when individuals are presented with evidence, they are not going to interpret those evidence, make sense of those evidence even-handedly. Instead, as cognitive misers, individuals will use some heuristics, mental shortcuts to make sense of complex issues such as politics, such as how to deal with a pandemic. And these mental shortcuts can be in the form of different things. Sometimes this is about what type of evidence is available to them, but sometimes it's also about who they are, with which groups they identify with. And this is what we focus on in this paper. We look at social and political identities as drivers of motivated reasoning, as a result of their political relevance. We argue that this would be a key aspect in understanding how what shapes individuals' institutional trust in Turkey, considering its underlying conditions. So here is our proposed theoretical model. This is the mediation model that we test. So we argue that identity would have an indirect effect on vaccine intentions by way of institutional trust. Here are our three hypotheses. Maybe Efe Hocam, I can leave the floor to you at this point.
Yes, thank you. Since, we already presented the hypotheses, maybe we can briefly talk about our case selection and how these hypotheses transform into our case selection, which will be focusing on Turkey. Well, since we are all living here in this country, I don't need to spend so much time to explain why Turkey would constitute a good case to examine and to test our theoretical mechanism. Regarding the social and political identities, let's begin with a social/political identity, the Turkish-Kurdish division in the society. Especially in almost near to 40 years, there's an ongoing conflict between Turkish armed forces and PKK, a terrorist organization, which claims to represent the Kurdish population. And as a result, on and off, we observe government concessions and or aggressive stances. Depending on the time and the incumbent. Occasionally. So that makes, the point is that after all, it's not a conflict paper. But the point is that it's a salient division in the society, Turkish-Kurdish division. And we observe it when it comes to elections, when it comes to other issues, and when it comes to ethnocentrism scores in various surveys and other things. Another identity is as a result of our over-polarized environment. Political environment is pro versus anti-government identities. We know that especially Emre Erdoğan's and Pınar Semercioğlu's, different studies and empirical works also show that, updated work also show that in different dimensions of polarizations, Turkey scores pretty high. Even in very simple things, believing in very simple facts, depending on whether you're an AKP supporter or the government supporter, let's say, because right now the political scene is a bit more complicated with AKP and MHP on the one hand, other parties on the other hand, or being a CHP or, E party or, HDP supporter, may totally condition your attitudes and feelings towards different issues. So that said, we came to a conclusion that, Turkey would be a good setting, and transforming, as I said, our propositions into testable hypotheses in the Turkish case is self-identifying as a Kurd or feeling close to an anti-government party. So these are two different hypotheses. These are not moderating in our case. Will be associated with lower perceived competence and fiduciary responsibility of the institutions officially tackling the pandemic. And this lower institutional trust, as a result, we believe that will result in a weaker intention to get vaccinated. And we also propose that, I mean, it's not the identity itself directly predicts the vaccine intentions, but a nuanced mechanism is ongoing here. The identity influences, I mean, affects the vaccine intentions of individuals through this institutional trust for the very reasons Ayşenur just explained in detail. So put together, the ethnic and partisan identities stemming from salient social political cleavages in Turkey will have an indirect influence on citizens' intentions for vaccination through shaping their institutional trust. Let me briefly talk about the data. Yes, great. We were lucky enough to embed our survey, which was already planned, but delayed over time, delayed multiple times. And I mean, we could execute the survey in such a moment that we could ask those type of questions as well. It's a survey with nationally representative sample. I mean, more than 1,800 people participated in our survey. The survey is not only conducted for, of course, these questions for COVID, for other studies as well. So this is why, I mean, given the importance of enough representation of different social identities, social and political identities, we oversampled from the eastern and southeastern parts of Turkey. So in total, in our main sample, we have 1,350 people, and plus an oversample part, 466 participants over the age of 18. So survey went to the field on November 7th and was there until December 29th, 2020. So this is a very recent one. And we were lucky enough that there was no shutdown at the time. And we conducted the survey face-to-face. This is also very important because, personally speaking, I mean, conducted few surveys on the field previously. I mean, Turkey is not still very a good place to conduct online surveys. We always oversample the educated people. We always oversample anti-government people. I mean, in that sense, face-to-face survey results are more valid. Of course, the time lapse is a bit long since this is the pandemic, COVID era. But still, our post-estimation analysis, cross-validation checks shows that we are in good shape. And totally, it lasted for 37 minutes, an average survey. It's not very long compared to the ones who were conducted on the field, but of course, not a short one we are claiming. But the most important thing about the time frame we conducted the survey, as Ayşenur mentioned at the very beginning, this is a time that we have started the plans about the vaccination, but nothing was sure yet. We at the time, we didn't know whether we're gonna be vaccinated, which vaccines will be available, in which order we will get the vaccination. So the point is that, okay, the state gonna vaccinate us. Vaccines are available out there. So it was a selling issue that no one knew the details. Remember, it was the beginning of January 2021 we started to learn it. Ayşenur, could you please? Yes, great. So it's a mediation analysis actually, but in order to show some of the effects, we divide them into the groups as well as reporting the mediated model itself as well. Our explanatory variables are ethnic identity and partisanship, as the reasons just explained. I mean, so being a Turk versus Kurd, coded as 1 or 0, or partisanship, based on the party ID reported by participants, we coded AKP and MHP supporters as pro-government, others as anti-government. And I mean, for small parties, like, I mean, public parties or so, I mean, they are not, most of the time, not very well represented in the data. So this is why it's not a huge problem whether we comprehensively added every single government supporter into the calling scheme. Our mediating variables are institutional trust related variables. The first one is perceived competence. We measure it from 0 to 10 scale. It's at 11-point Likert scale. We ask the respondents how well the President's Office, or I mean, as another item, Ministry of Health, or as another item, the police have executed their tasks during the duties during the pandemic. And then we came up with an additive in this. I mean, actually combining individuals' beliefs about how well these officers executed their task. For perceived fiducial responsibility, now we measure each item in a 0 to 5-point Likert scale. We ask 2 questions and again come up with an average of these 2. For the perceived competence as well, I said additive in this, but we added everything and divided, took the average of it. The state provides all citizens with equal rights and opportunities without any discrimination based on religious or ethnic identities. The state provides all citizens with equal rights and opportunities without any discrimination based on region and city. So these were our perceived fiduciary responsibility questions. And lastly, our vaccine intention question was again measured in a scale of 0 to 10, higher scores indicating the respondent is more likely to get the vaccine. But there's a trick there. I will come to that point in a minute. Ayşenur. Here are the results. I will not show you any tables or any stars, any numbers. Let's go with the substantive results. So it's a mediative model. Let's focus on the first part, whether identity of individuals affect their belief on their attitudes towards institutions dealing with the pandemic. As you can see, here the dotted ones are representing anti-government respondents. The solid line is pro-government, and on the vertical axis, Turks versus Kurds. As you can see, there is a huge difference and significant difference between pro-government and anti-government respondents when you compare the lines vertically. And when you compare the lines horizontally, you see that being Kurd versus being Turk would also make a difference, lower your institutional trust when it comes to lower your perception about the competence of institutions. So in that case, if you're, anti-government Kurd, on average, it's like 4.7, let's say 5. In a scale of 0 to 10, the perceived competence of institutions. If you're a pro-government Turk, it is 8. And as I said, both are significant differences, horizontally and vertically. The same is true for fiduciary responsibility as well. When you look at it, pro-government respondents are more likely to believe that, more likely to perceive fiduciary responsibility of the institutions, and Turks compared to Kurds are also more likely to perceive it. And this is the second half. So, whether this institutional trust, whether perceived competence of these institutions fighting with COVID, or whether the perceived fiduciary responsibility of institutions fighting with COVID affects vaccine intentions of an average citizen. And indeed, we see that it is the case. The higher the institutional trust measure scores, the more likely that the respondent will get the vaccine. Which is important because, just to reiterate it, even though we now, at some point we were also thinking about this with Ayşenur. Vaccines are so rare that, are there really, is it a real problem after all? If there are vaccines around, we will get the shot. It's not like this classical American type of vaccine hesitancy thing. Let me give you some numbers, remind you some numbers, sorry. those who are available to get the vaccines in Turkey right now, it is around 70%, the vaccination rate. 30% of citizens, though it is their right to get vaccinated, for some reason, of course, this is a separate question. I'm not claiming that this 30% is vaccine hesitant, but still 30% of the citizens are not getting their vaccines, even though it is their right. So, I mean, we believe that these huge differences and significant differences shows that, I mean, something is going on and something is underlying conditions of the society. Could we go to the other one, Ayşenur? And this is the results of the mediation analysis. We will not go deeper in interpreting the results, but to simply say, identity itself is not a significant predictor of vaccine intention, but identities are influencing vaccine intentions of the respondents through the problems created by institutional trust. Okay, this is an important thing as well, because I mean, yes, it's a very polarized society. Yes, conflict was there for a while, but this is our interpretation of the results. There are still enough space to overcome the issues, because it is the institutional trust, actually. These identities predict our institutional trust, and as eventually our vaccine intentions are predicted. We would like to, I mean, take a step forward, and as a robustness check, we would like to this time run this story with a real case. I mean, how to say, to check the robustness of the findings, we this time embedded a survey experiment about the vaccine hesitation. Remember 3-4 slides earlier, I told you that vaccine intention was measured from 0 to 10. Actually, before that measure, in classical analysis, we controlled for different manipulations. So manipulations were not affecting the findings. I just summarized for you. But here we do the following thing. Before asking the question whether you would like to take the vaccine or not, we are saying that the research for vaccine to stop the spread of coronavirus is coming to an end. Lately, according to the experts, the majority of the people should be vaccinated for the vaccine to be successful. It is thought that such a wide range operation can be done through, now we are manipulating the media, either police organization or Ministry of Health or municipalities or private health organizations. You are, as a respondent, you are randomly assigned one of these treatments. And we add free of charge. So money is not an issue. At the time, we didn't know that. Luckily, actually, it is really free of charge. So we can say that it's a very realistic scenario. So we were not deceiving individuals, but we were asking them, well, this is taught, this is planned, what do you think? Now, on the left hand, you see the role of identity. On the right hand, you see the role of, let's say ideology or pro-government, anti-government stance. The black ones are Kurds on the left hand, gray ones are Turks. And on the right hand, the black ones are anti-government and gray ones are pro-government. So depending on the manipulated institution in our story, and it's only the institution name changing, the whole story is safe. As you see, if respondents, comparing Kurds and Turks, we are on the left hand right now, especially in the Ohio region, where many atrocities, many bad stories were happened at the time. If the police would have actually executed the vaccination, Kurds are significantly less likely to get the vaccine compared to Turks. When it's Ministry of Health, we do not see a significant relation. When it's the municipality, again, we observe the same significant relation. And it makes sense because all the municipalities are, almost all the municipalities were actually replaced by trustees by the government. So again, these trustees are seen as part of the government, somehow the police and municipality, these are actually somehow, I mean, measuring the same thing. Ministry of Health, though, I mean, is not significant. And private organization is serving like a control condition here, and it's not significant again. When it comes to anti-government, pro-government, we see the difference in police organization. Anti-government people are less likely to get the vaccine if the police would actually administer the vaccination. But it's not significant, and we believe there are many reasons to observe this. But this time, I mean, Minister of Health, so those who are voting for CHP, E-Party, on average are saying that if it's Minister of Health, around 5/10, their vaccination behavior. For pro-government parties, it's 7/10. And we believe these are very strong results because traditionally speaking, following the conventional wisdom, pro-government voters are more conservative voters, and more conservative voters are most of the time more hesitant towards vaccines. And even though this is the case in the global literature, we observe that more conservative people on average are expressing more pro-vaccine attitudes, which shows that our tests are pretty conservative tests, yet we still find significant impact of these. I mean, the role in terms of the role of institutions which were shaped by the identities.
So to summarize our findings, can you hear me? Okay. To summarize, we find that both self-identifying as a Kurd or feeling close to an anti-government party are associated with lower institutional trust, which then results in weaker intentions for getting vaccinated. And we also confirm that this is a mediation relationship, meaning the ethnic and partisan identity, they do not have a direct influence on vaccine intentions, but only through the indirect negative effect mediated by institutional trust. So to go back to our motivation, for this study, to the analogy that I mentioned in the beginning, that we're all in the same boat. Well, we show that existing unrests in societies are not robust to exogenous shocks, such as global health crises. And the existing unrests still function as a lens that people use to make sense of the evidence of the new information that they are presented with. In this case, a vaccine opportunity. Of course, it is very important to highlight that we conducted this study before the actual vaccination has begun. So this was in the, at the most uncertain stage about what is going to happen, who's going to be vaccinated, when people are going to be vaccinated. But still, our findings show that in a rather robust way, institutional trust is very important. So to ensure mass cooperation with public health efforts such as vaccination, earning trust becomes the key. However, the bigger question, I guess we need to answer is how one earns trust in a society with underlying conditions. Do these existing unrests allow for that opportunity to maybe improve individuals' institutional trust? And if you are to do so, how do you do that? How do you approach those individuals through, the health communication efforts, public health policies, so on and so forth? And thinking of recent issues, the recent situation with vaccine availability, planned procedure versus the actual application in terms of the order, in terms of the prioritization, and who's going to get vaccinated first. This becomes a very tricky phenomenon, we believe. And we hope to do a follow-up study when the vaccination progresses more, hopefully, in near future. And we'd like to see how this turns out after a lot of people actually got vaccinated. And we would like to see whether their social political identities, whether the society's underlying conditions still played a role as we showed in our study. So this is all from us for now. We would love to hear your comments and questions. Thank you so much for listening.
Wow, thank you very much. Wow, that was a very ambitious research. And I mean, I, as a quantitative person who studies, survey data and trying to understand public attitudes towards various issues, my field of interest is more like on foreign policy. But I think I personally found it very useful and a very interesting research, very ambitious one. So congratulations on your research. As Ayşenur, you mentioned, we really would like to see it like evolving into new fields, particularly maybe in this field and in pandemics or in vaccine research whatsoever. So this is an interdisciplinary research, I must say. I know that none of you is an expert on COVID-19 or vaccines or, these sort of health policy related issues. But as a case study and, beyond its contextual relevance, I think you, in the end, you came up with a cross-cutting research, and congratulations for that. Well, if I may, I have a couple of questions. Maybe these questions can open up a further Q&A session. Very briefly, if I understood the entire framework correctly, you look at the mediational impact of institutional trust, right? So, and I'm actually very, surprised with a couple of your findings, like, for instance, the anti-government attitudes and their relation with, vaccines, getting vaccinated or not. So your research says that if you are anti-government, you tend to be a more anti-vaccine person because of the institutional trust, not because of your partisan identity, right? So I don't know if ever while, you were doing your analysis, have you checked for, dropping the mediational variable, testing both the minority identity and the partisanship identity and their role on attitudes towards vaccines, right? So the second issue is, have you tested for any controls? Because I personally am very curious to learn more about, the role of certain control variables. You might be anti-government, but various studies show us that, in Turkey, those who oppose government or those who oppose AKP are, more educated, they're more metropolitan people, and, so forth and so on. So there are, I think, very relevant, control variables that you could, or you could consider adding. I don't know if you've done it for your particular study. And the other one is level of, knowledge. This is like, I think, a star variable for quantitative people. We are always curious to learn about what we know, what the general public knows about the issue, right? So in your survey, I'm sure that you have certain questions that raise the issue of the level of knowledge of vaccines. So if you have it, if you don't have it, don't bother yourself with that. And the last question is maybe a comparative research. Since this research field on COVID-19 is evolving all around the world, there has been like a lot of work, being carried out nowadays on COVID-19. But by chance, if you've come across with a comparative study or, in another context, a similar model was run so that would give you some maybe more comparative implications for your study, if you've ever come up with that. Well, thank you very much. I talked too much. And maybe if you want to answer right now, we can,
Okay. We can begin answering, then take the next round of questions. For the first two questions, yes, indeed, we run the models. Just, independent variable is the political social identity of the individuals, and dependent variable attitudes towards vaccine, and these are not significant. So indeed, being a pro-government versus anti-government, or being a Turk versus Kurd, does not significantly predict vaccine, vaccine intentions of the behaviors. But the story itself, actually, it's aside from the fact that this is our paper, we liked it, we enjoyed it, but in general as well, it somehow fits. For the reasons you also explained, I also had said before, normally you would expect, especially when it comes to, pro-government, anti-government, more conservative, more progressive people, normally speaking, if it was not a polarized environment, if it would not affect the institutional trust, we might even expect the reverse. For example, in US case, Republicans are more vaccine hesitant compared to Democrats. But here it's not the case, and it shows the true power of this, mediating effect. And also, we are believing that at the time, after all, we measured the attitudes, vaccine intentions of the individuals. We didn't measure the behaviors. And this is a long, long debated issue in the literature, attitudes versus behaviors and other things. And this is why we are so excited with Ayşenur, because now we can run another batch of the survey, hopefully, if you will have enough money, in 6-7 months' time. And then we can compare the attitudes with behaviors as well. And then we can truly say whether such attitudes are actually shaping the behaviors itself or just attitudes. Even if those are simply attitudes, it is fine. Even if it doesn't transform into the action, it is fine, because most of the time governments need to make the planning accordingly, looking at the attitudes. But if this 30% people, who are not getting vaccinated, even though it's their right to get vaccination, if some of these people are truly not getting vaccinated because they are somehow suspicious of the integrity of the ministry or the vaccines or China-Turkey deal or these kinds of stuff, then we have a huge problem. Then we can say, Houston, we have a problem here. The social cleavages in the society directly threaten our well-being and our survival as a society. Regarding the control variables, actually we control in all our models.
Controls? Do you have the controls in front of you?
They are open in front of me. Do you want to share them? We can. I can share the screen if you want. Sorry for that. Here. So as you see in the control variables, we have the usual suspects like, gender, employment, income. Employment is a very important one because, whether you get vaccine or not may have determined whether you're gonna work or not. Income, age, education, religiosity, whether you are at, lone wolf or you have a family. And also we controlled for COVID-related factors like the knowledge about the COVID, whether they sorry?
We need to add this, like we asked how knowledgeable they think they are. We didn't have knowledge questions per se, but we this is a self-reported knowledge question.
Exactly, whether they had a COVID experience by themselves or in their close friends and relatives, how threatening they find the COVID pandemic, how concerned they are about the COVID pandemic, how knowledgeable they feel about the COVID. So we also control these stuff. So all the results we reported and we actually showed you were including the control variables as well. And maybe for the last one, Ayşenur, you would like to answer the comparative aspect of it, since you were in contact with.
Yes, so as we know, there are some efforts for the comparative analysis of vaccine intentions in different contexts. but to my knowledge, the ones that are being published, they are rather limited, given how recent the rising numbers of vaccination is in a lot of different contexts. But we are definitely interested in turning this into a comparative study. We know that at least in the UK, there are some researchers looking at this and at least making an educated guess that this could be vaccine hesitancy could be due to institutional trust, which we show in our findings. So we are looking for that definitely. And finally, Ebru Canan, you asked whether this was tested before. There are some studies that look at the Ebola case, studying the vaccine, institutional trust, but of course the context, the underlying conditions of those societies are much more different. So in that sense, the story behind is different, but the mediation was tested before, though the findings were not the way that we got in our study. So this also makes this quite interesting, we believe. And finally, to go back to the first question, if we are to, in the future, test the actual behavior, it is important that, we think we should also take into consideration that we had an additional peak in between the time of uncertainty about vaccinations and when the vaccinations got much more available to a larger population in Turkey. So the threat, the prolonged, fight with the pandemic may have an influence on how frustrated individuals are, how, more open to solutions, including vaccine, which takes us back to the complacency component of vaccine hesitancy. People may have different evaluations about how high or low the risk is and how crucial the vaccination may be, looking at different examples where we have Israel or other contexts that are seemingly much more closer to the old normal that we had before COVID.
Well, thank you very much. And I think just as a follow-up, the uncertainties about the vaccines and, your direction towards that research field in the future, Rahime Hoca and Atakan, or I think BAU POLSIR is Çağkan or Atakan, they actually raised another question that could be linked with, these uncertainties and how people, I think maybe it's linked with the salience, the level of knowledge, and, various other variables. Rahime Hocam, would you like to ask your question to Efe and Ayşenur Hocas yourselves? I always impose on people, to talk and to, well, please, Rahime, can you unmute? Atakan, can we unmute Rahime Hoca?
Okay, yes. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you for this excellent presentation. I really enjoyed it. And I'm also interested with institutional trust argument because of my gender studies research. Okay, so regarding your presentation, I really learned a lot. Thank you very much for this extensive research and presentation and taking time. You have mentioned a lot of control variables that I was looking at closely, especially after I asked my question to Ebru, directed to Ebru Hoca. But I couldn't find my answer actually. That I would like to ask, whether the intention to be vaccinated can be actually influenced overall from pharmaceutical industry and trust to pharmaceutical industry in general, or in pharmaceutical companies, whether Sinovac or BioNTech, whether it can be related to general in that to that trust in general. And I'm also curious about whether you have controlled other variables. For example, many people would think that, since the start of the pandemic, we've been arguing, and in our personal conversations, we've been arguing that time to produce a reliable vaccine takes a lot more time. So whether this could be intention not to be vaccinated can be an outcome of, not believing that any kind of vaccine would bear any positive results. So I'm curious about that.
Whether you have taken question. Thank you so much for your comments and the great question. Yes, these are very important potential predictors of vaccine hesitancy, both trust in science, as you said, trust in pharmaceutical companies, and the realistic, how realistic it is to have the vaccine at that time, considering when the pandemic has begun. And I'm sure many of us have seen those, videos where, or like visualizations where it shows, the vaccine for this disease took this many years for this disease. How come we have vaccines for this? Unfortunately, we didn't have the controls for these, but if we do a follow-up, I think both these, trust in science and pharmaceutical institutions in general, as well as, people's general attitudes about vaccines. And there is also a question in the chat, the vaccine sources, whether it's the Chinese vaccine or the, Pfizer's vaccine, makes a difference for individuals. So unfortunately for this survey, we didn't have those controls. So that could be a limitation considering the vaccine hesitancy literature, but we would definitely include them in our follow-up study.
To add something to answer Rahim Hoca's question, as I said, I mean, the timeline of the survey here is very helpful for us to respond to such question because at the time we were still discussing whether to buy from BioNTech, and since BioNTech founders are also Turkish, it was very salient in the news and in the society, or Sinovac or Sputnik. And remember, actually, we were thinking that probably we were assigning a higher probability to buy a Russian jab because, I mean, we were talking like, I mean, when you get the vaccine, you're gonna start talking in Russian. And I mean, so at the time it was very uncertain. Of course, I mean, knowing these things may affect the results. But here, still, I guess, the core of the results will persist because after all, it will change the intercept. It will not create a differential effect. I mean, maybe overall we will see an increased trust in vaccines as a result, an increased vaccination behavior. But still the difference will be there. If we measure like this, it will be like that. So in that sense, probably that effect would be distributed equally and positively to the whole society in that sense. But of course, these are very important things to investigate, especially for these stages of the COVID. Like, I mean, if we would buy BioNTech more compared to Sinovac, could we manage to vaccinate all these 30% who are not getting vaccinated? I mean, in order to answer this question, Rahim Hocam, it will be very important to check this as well.
And there are
Thank you very much.
Unusual. Sorry, just to add something. And recently, we have also heard that, for instance, first, like the Chinese vaccine was, looked down upon in the beginning, but then we heard that people were actually not showing up to their Pfizer vaccination appointments, saying they prefer the inactive vaccine as opposed to mRNA vaccine. So like those nuances could also be further investigated now that we have the plethora of vaccines.
Yeah, I think this needs to be supported then some qualitative studies, right? To deep down into the the shortcuts. We have Hande Hoca. She raised her hand. Hande, yes, please go ahead. Yeah, you're unmuted. We cannot hear Hande Hoca. Atakan, can we just unmute?
Can you hear me now? Great. Hi, thank you very much for the presentation, and really congratulations on being able to carry out a study, actual study, under the pandemic condition. I think that's very beneficial. Now, I'm wondering about the wider implications of your results. I mean, could you perhaps talk a little bit about that? Because I mean, this is an expected result that in Turkey, polarization is so deep that it would have an impact on institutional trust, which obviously has an impact on vaccination. And I would say that perhaps this is the area in which we would expect the most, nevertheless, you know, the greater numbers being vaccinated because the threat is so big. But in other areas, we find the same thing. For instance, in environmental politics, the impact of lack of institutional trust is so important in putting together a coherent policy. So what, and I realize that this is not a simple question and I don't have the answer myself, but I was just wondering your thoughts about, so what would you say about the wider implications? What would you suggest for policy making or for sort of going around this problem of lack of institutional trust? Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for your question. I'll start with it. So I think we can look at some non-vaccine applications of policymakers, decision makers, representatives of the institutions that are trying to encourage citizens to cooperate with the policies, such as the lockdown or like the restrictions. So I think the wider implication is that institutional trust should be considered as a priority in terms of winning that cooperation ticket from the citizens. I mean, recent criticisms were oftentimes, you know, why are we, you know, at our homes, but like X group is out there doing this, doing that. I mean, that feeling of inequality maybe should be addressed more. And that this is contributing to lower institutional trust should be remembered, and how this would turn into then lower cooperation with vaccination efforts should be considered, because as we know, for vaccinations to work properly, there should be, you know, some, you know, the percentage of citizens being vaccinated so that it actually makes things go more smoothly. So in that sense, I would say the greatest implication is that institutional trust should be prioritized, and it's not only about whether people think that the vaccination can be handled by the ministry or not. I think it's more of a general institutional trust that are influenced by a number of different moving parts.
Exactly, and just as a short point, we believe that, I mean, pandemic is the beginning, many argue, right? I recently saw a cartoon. I mean, it was pandemic as a wave, and then the bigger wave was climate change, and the bigger wave was biodiversity collapse or something like that. So, I mean, probably reading these results and reinterpreting them, I would say that every single society should take the precautions to somehow deal with these exogenous shocks. I mean, in that sense, yes, I don't have any solution either. But especially regarding another question in the chat, and to answer that question as well, for example, for the experimental part, we then, very sorry about this, we always thought that we wish we could have introduced World Health Organization, for example, as a mediary institution as well, to see whether such independent organizations would have been seen as more valid mediums. I never know it, of course, I never know the response, but the point is, especially in Turkey and in similar context right now, we know that, I mean, the citizens lost their trust about the fact that the state is there to protect them. and they are questioning this. And once you question it, you can question everything, and not only the pandemic, fight against pandemic, but other issues as well. So this should be prioritized, definitely. I mean, I don't know how, or to some extent I know how, but I mean, this should be prioritized.
Well, thank you very much. That was, I think, a very fruitful discussion. I'm sure that there will be more, you know, questions and debates in the near future on this, because probably this will stay like for a long time with us. And we came to the end of our time. Well, that was very inspiring. I congratulate you again. I know the challenge in data collections, you know, there's always like questions about why didn't you test for this variable, the other variable, you know, there is no end for that. But I'm sure that your, you know, current survey has like more data than what you've showed us. So we are looking forward to, you know, reading more, listening to more about, you know, the data analysis and empirical findings. There's a huge room for that, right? I mean, factual analysis of COVID-19. I want to thank everyone for your great contributions, your students and my colleagues, my friends in the department. And of course, I mean, I want to thank to Efe and Ayşenur. Once again, congratulations for this award. In the beginning, I said that you're young and promising. I want to change it. You're young, but not promising. You already have done great, you know, scholarly work for a lot of inspiring studies. So, and I'm very actually proud of, you know, young people like yours, yourselves, you know, contributing too much in empirical data analysis. Well, thank you again. And I want to, on behalf of everyone, I want to give a great applause to you. And thanks for being with us. And we are looking forward to be here in another Politics and Society webinars. And I wish everyone will stay very safe and healthy, you know, mentally, physically. So thank you very much. And I want to lastly thank to Çağkan and Atakan, as always, you know, the institutional part of all these seminars. They do great work to make our seminars happen. All right, thank you very much. And hope to see you again soon in good shape.